You know, it used to be you would argue with someone about who was occultic, who was not, but nowadays they don't even care about that. People are just out there making it clear where they belong or what they believe. Now, recently there's been this picture right here by a so-called prophet or reverend, as he called himself, Reverend Obofour, who just came out from Ghana, and is very, very popular over there. He has a very, very huge mega church. But recently he put out this picture of a chair that's in his house, supposedly. And this chair, you might think it's a chair, Ricky. But there are certain things that a person who's a Christian consciously wouldn't get. And, oh, I forgot to show you the rest of the picture. The picture actually looks like this, the rest of it. Now, let's not have nightmares here. Remove the thing. So, the man has a cobra head or a cobra body chair. So this is like the entire structure of the cobra, and then you got the bottom over there, and it's got all the details in there, but the cobra's mouth is like wide open. Now, the cobra or the snake in the Bible is in reference to the devil. I don't remember the Bible actually ever putting out an image of a snake, which was good. There was only a narrative that came up with Moses' period when they were suffering from snake bites, and there was a snake that was to be wrapped around this thingy and lifted up, and every time they look up upon that stick, they would see the healing that comes from future say the Messiah. And that picture was illustration of death. Okay, yes. So that narrative of Moses speaking of the Messiah in the future was actually in reference to death. Okay, so when you use that reference, be aware of what it actually means, which is why when Lesotho Daniel was pulling that card, it can't work for whatever narrative you're trying to pull, because there was a certain meaning attached to the snake back in that period of Moses. Now, that's why you don't see that narrative ever portrayed anywhere else. You only see it within that context, and outside of that, it's other things, because there was a meaning. Remember, that meaning was attached to receiving salvation and the idea of being in death and being in life. And I hope that clears it, is that they were either choosing towards life or they were either choosing towards death. And the sight of the snake bites that they were having was now something that was out there, now something that could save them. It was a picture of life, from life unto death. But there's a lot more we could talk about that. But if you think about it, that's the barrier line, life unto death. So you can't use that narrative to kind of explain anything outside of that, because you can get in trouble explaining things that are not biblical outside of that. But why then would a supposed prophet have that in his house? It's in reference to the occult, because this is the throne to whom he worships. What other example? Do you think that serpent that he's sitting, that serpent chair that he has sitting in his house, do you think that's in reference to the Moses picture? No. It doesn't even come close to exemplifying that. That's why it's got its mouth open, almost ready to devour. It represents something else completely. Okay? And so sometimes people use these things which they could kind of play, to try and use as play on words. But remember, Paul does say we are not like those ones in the world who use gimmicks and stuff like that. Gimmicks actually make people go into error. There's a lot of error that comes from gimmicks. And so when people pull these things, remember that reference was only in life and death. You don't play in the lane of life and death. That was the lane that the Messiah played on. Okay? And he says, the Bible actually puts it out like this. He says, he is He is a high priest forever after the order of Melchizedek, putting him along those edges of life and death. The same way the children of Israel are coming out of death is exemplified by them coming unto salvation. So here is a serpent back from death, and here is a serpent to represent the area where you're going, your salvation basically. So here is your salvation, and here is it's a picture that stands at a particular point when God is illustrating their freedom, basically. Like I said, there's a lot more we could say about that, but we don't want to speculate too much. We don't want to go overboard. It says that we have the New Testament because it is better. There was no need, there would have been no need for a better or a new one if the one that we had before was thinking. So now that shows you that you can't use the imagery of a snake to exemplify that life and death burial line that I was just explaining. Why? Because that was a shadow. That was a shadow of that burial line. And therefore, like for instance, I'll give you an example of how that burial line is established, right? In order for them to find you an antidote for what serpent bit you, they need to find what snake it was, right? So there you go, life and death. Now, we don't need you to be going back to the shadow in order for us to fully define it when we have the real thing. So if you are using any imagery, that's why the Bible says, in past times God spoke to us in many diverse manners, but now he speaks to us in his Son. And so every message is communicated through the Son. There's no need for a shadow. So you couldn't even, I'm saying this, I'm explaining this for those people that are tricky. You know, there are people that are very tricky. They will see this supposed prophet hanging around with snakes, busy swinging snakes, doing what, and then they will take that and say, you see a snake back there in the Old Testament. And so that's why I'm exemplifying, I'm putting out an example here of why that doesn't work. Because that was a shadow. You don't need to be pointing at my shadow when I'm here. Now you see Christ. No, this is Christ. No, it's not Christ. Okay, no, this is Ricky here. No, it's not Ricky. Ricky is here. You don't need to make a reference to a shadow. Why? Because in the shadow, that's where now you get into error. The same way the Bible forbids in Hebrews us going back into animal sacrifice. Why? Because you can't do animal sacrifice authentically to God after the ultimate sacrifice has been given. It's the same thing with this imagery that some of these people, you know them, they're out there, Charlies, all over the place. They can use that type of a thing, banking on that. You just want to see that it's in the Bible. You just want to see that it's in the Bible. Oh yeah, it's there, Moses and what. Yes, but you can't use that shadow because the real thing is here. And that particular real thing, when it comes to the snake and all that, yeah, it's a very blur line. You have to be very careful. It means what? There is only one area you can go with it. You can't bend it and try to, no, you make a lot of mistakes. You see, unlike many messianic symbols that you have in the Old Testament, the snake one is one of those ones which is just straight, means this. Just straight means this. It's not one of those that you could kind of like, you know, Joseph is a kind of a Messiah, and then you give your drawings, and then you leave out all the other details, and then you know Moses is kind of a shadow of the Messiah. You know, he's a deliverer. You know, you just pull that one element. You know, you could kind of leave out that he killed someone when he exited thing. You leave out because it means there is a certain element out of, you know, David, King, Messiah, kind of a thing. You understand? So, unlike what we do when we are interpreting the kinds or shadows of the Messiah in the Old Testament, when it comes to the serpent, there isn't a lot of room to do that. It's just this. And you make a very big mistake, because remember, it's like animal sacrifice. If you think of animal sacrifice and how to represent that, if you want to have a perfect image of the entire thing of the serpent, you have to look at animal sacrifice. You can't go over there, over there, over there. It's just right here. And so this is a very blurry line, but people who are occultic can use it, especially if you are ignorant of the relevance of the Messiah to all these things that you might want to. He says, you read of all these things because you think you will find life in them. Can't little do they know, life is standing right in front of you. He is Christ. He is the Messiah. You don't need all these. You don't need gimmicks. You don't need to pull snakes. You don't. So in case anybody ever comes up with any of that stuff, push it off, because that person is deceptive.